Welcome to Fundamentals. I'm Pastor Matt here with Pastor Casey and John Davis, and today we are sponsored by Casey's Chamomile Tea. If you're Google searching that, what you're going to find out is there is not a Casey's Chamomile Tea. It's literally Casey's Chamomile Tea.
Yeah, it's real.
It's very tasty, but very hot.
Freshly brewed.
Yes.
I might need a minute before talking.
In your alumni mug. Is that an alumni mug or just a regular?
Concordia Seminary Graduate School alumni mug, yes.
Ah,
Wow, I feel so left out right now.
I know.
Well, it could be yours for 4 years and a few payments totaling about $100,000.
That is a $100,000 mug.
Cheers.
Totally worth it, because without the gift of seminary, we would not get to be here talking to you.
So,
I love you, John.
Okay. So today, we won't waste any more of your time. We are going to be jumping into the 9th and 10th commandment. So the reason we're putting these together will become a little bit more clear as we share these commandments. Side note, I said split it up. They said put it together, so we put it together.
we win.
So the 9th commandment is you are not to covet your neighbor's house. And then the 10th commandment is you are not to covet your neighbor's wife, male or female servant, cattle, or whatever is his. So what does this mean?
Yeah, so because they're two commandments, I'll kind of go through both of them. So the first one, which is, as you remember, you should not covet your neighbor's house. It says we should fear and love God so that we do not scheme to get our neighbor's inheritance or his house, or get it in a way which only appears right, but help and be of service to him in keeping it. And then the 10th commandment, which is kind of more about our neighbor's people that belong to him or her. It says we should fear and love God so that we do not entice or force away our neighbor's wife, workers, or animals, or turn them against him, but urge them to stay and do their duty. I really like that, last kind of line of that one.
Not to urge them to...
Yeah, don't turn them against people, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's, it's really interesting, just kind of the depth that these commandments go. And what I love is just kind of, the coveting idea, and how specific these commandments get with coveting. Because I think in our culture today, coveting is a big engine that drives marketing. Right? It's like, hey, look at this great thing that you don't have that will make your life so much better if you have it. You need one. It's kind of like almost this coveting idea of, well, your neighbor has one, you should have one too. And yet in the 10 commandments, it's really trying to steer us away from that idea. Now, if you're going with the assumption, I think this is a really good assumption, that God gives us the 10 commandments not to hold us back from joy in our life, but so that we can experience life to the full. Why do you think these commandments might be there, where God's saying, don't look over at your neighbor's stuff and say, I want that stuff. That should be my stuff. Why do you think he's kind of encouraging us in that?
Well, I think what I would say is coveting to me seems opposed to contentment, right? If you're coveting something, you are not content with your current situation. And you have this belief that if you could acquire this thing that you're coveting, that somehow that might make you content. But I think very often we experience that if there's something that you're really looking for to bring you contentment, maybe when you get that thing, it brings you at least some kind of feeling close to contentment, but how long is that actually going to last? So I think as you're talking about this commandment being something that's liberating rather than restricting, at least where my mind jumps to is to the idea of contentment. Contentment being the kind of state that really feels like, yeah, I am free from concern. I am in a really good spot. I would love to be there. And I think eliminating coveting from your own heart and life is a big piece of that.
Yeah, and I love how you kind of point that out, because the first place we always go when we think of coveting or that concept of not being content is we always go to our kids first, or like when we were kids. And remember, you used to sit down, you were maybe watching Saturday morning cartoons, you'd eat your big bowl of cereal right there, and all of a sudden, what do? They got the toy on there that your life is just not complete until you get this all plastic action figure that 10 minutes after you have it falls apart, But you see that, and I see that in my kids today. It's like, oh, I have to have this. Life won't be complete without this. And then all of a sudden they get it. 10 minutes later, they realize maybe they're not in a better state than they really thought they were just because they had that. And what I think we need to realize is that's not just a kid thing. That's something that's sometimes hard to grow out of. We tell ourselves that lie a lot. Oh, if I had that thing over there, everything would be better. If I just had the right car, if I just had the right phone. In fact, man, some of these technology companies are like masters at this, right? Like all of a sudden you've got a perfectly working smartphone, sitting right there. And then all of a sudden, what happens? A new one comes out and you're looking at the new one going, oh, well, my phone doesn't shoot in 4K. I wish I could shoot in 4K. Life's not right. Oh, this is moving so much slower than it used to. I need to look, we just kind of master that in our culture. And what it is like you said, that contentment issue. Am I content with the things that God's given me?
And I think about it too in kind of a communal aspect. If you have a community or even a society that is constantly striving for something else, especially if that something else belongs to someone else, what kind of an environment is that to live in? But picture conversely, an environment where you have people who aren't consumed by these kinds of desires, and people who are content in such a way that they've been liberated now to be generous with their own stuff. They have been liberated to care for one another. I think to myself, man, a world governed by the Ninth and Tenth Commandment sounds like a much more comfortable world, a much more enjoyable world. Yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah, and I think too, keep in mind, this is a heart issue, not a bank account issue. And kind of what I've learned over the years in ministry is, in ministry, you get this opportunity to see just some of the most incredibly generous people you've ever in your life met, and something like humblingly generous. And what I've noticed about that is, it's not always about somebody that just has a lot of money or a lot of stuff. And so they're like, oh, I have so much here. You can have a little too. There's some very wealthy people that I've known to be incredibly generous. But there's also people that you wouldn't consider wealthy, you wouldn't consider that well-to-do, who are just incredibly generous with their stuff. And the difference is not how much you do or don't have. The difference is your attitude toward the things that you have and what you appear to need or not need.
Yeah, and I think a really awesome thing about the Ninth and Tenth Commandment, and I think a cool picture of how they fit well sort of at the end of this, like these laws that God gives, is you can kind of see some of how the Ninth and Tenth Commandment relate to some of these other commandments too. Like for instance, a good example of kind of how the 10th commandment can be broken, even in relation with maybe the 6th commandment, is the story of, David and Bathsheba, right? So it's this story of, yes, adultery, right? But also the story of, hey, here's a man who sees a woman that is another person's wife and wants something that's not his, right? The best the kid example of that would be the VeggieTales story of King George and the rubber ducky, right? He has all these duckies and loves all of his duckies, but he just didn't have that one, right? He needed that one too, So you have that example. You also have, you were talking about all their possessions and stuff. We just talked about that a couple weeks ago with the 7th commandment, right? Of protecting our neighbor's possessions and the things that they have. And I love how, like I said, that last one says that we do not entice or force away our neighbor's wife, workers, and animals, or turn them against them, right? Which kind of goes along with what we talked about last week with the 8th commandment of speaking about our neighbor in the correct light, as to not draw them away from people. So I think it's really cool how you kind of start to see, we've been talking for 9 weeks now about these commandments, and you're kind of seeing how
And I love how the 9th and 10th really tie a loop back to the first commandment. If you remember, a long time ago, we talked about what it is to have a God, and part of how we've defined having a God is something or someone from whom you can expect all good.
Mm-hmm.
And notice how that ties in with the 9th and 10th commandment. If you're expecting all good to come from God, you realize that what you have in the present moment is what the Lord has decided to give you in that moment. And when you realize that your stuff, your well-being, your health, all of that comes from him, it's suddenly not on you to go get more. It's on him who's supplying you with the things that you need. And now, of course, we still live and operate in a world where we can acquire things for ourselves. And I'm not saying to just like go sit on a log and just wait for whatever the Lord showers down on you. But I think it's more of a posture thing, a heart posture. Where is your heart oriented? Is it oriented toward the Lord who's supplying you with everything you need? Or is it oriented, I guess, outward on kind of a horizontal level, thinking like, oh, I got to acquire this. And I think you see a really cool connection back to the first commandment.
Yeah, because I think another question you can ask yourself that really helps in that idea of coveting and honestly contentment is peace. Where do I find my peace? I think a lot of times we struggle to find contentment and we struggle to covet because we think that in those things, that's where I'm going to find my peace. And what's really interesting is that's another way it circles back, because God says, I am the Lord your God, have no other gods before me. He's saying, I'm the place that you're going to find all these good things, like you're saying. And I love what Jesus says in the Gospel of John. He's getting ready. He knows he's going to be leaving his disciples soon. And he says to them, peace I give you, my peace I leave with you, not as the world gives do I give. And what Jesus is saying is that I have this peace that I freely give to you, this assurance, this hope that can really make you truly content. Not like the world's contentment that's here for a few moments once you get that thing, until that thing breaks down or it becomes obsolete or it's not the new and greatest and best thing anymore. But rather, Jesus is saying this is a peace that I freely give to you, a peace that's not going to run out. Like you think like John chapter 4, woman at the well, this woman that's trying to find peace in all these relationships that aren't lasting. And Jesus kind of steps in and goes, how's the next bad relationship doing? Is that bringing you what you're looking for? He says, I'm going to give you a water that won't run out. It's this idea that, I'm not going to find peace in like looking over at Casey's mug and going, oh man, Casey got such a great, mug from Concordia Summit. I went to Concordia Summit. Why didn't I get a mug like this? I want this mug. Honestly, I'm not saying that to get your mug.
Well, look under your chair after the episode.
Surprise! You get a mug. But really, what it's kind of saying is if I had that or don't have that, that's not really where I'm going to find my peace. I'm going to find my peace in the God who's the one that gives, and not only gives, but gives freely, that peace and contentment we're all looking for.
Yeah, and I think something that I kind of want to bring up, and I'd be interested to see what you guys have to say on this too, and especially in our culture today, whether you're, in the 5th grade or 50 years old, or however old you are, I think we all can kind of get confused about this commandment a little bit, because one of the big questions that comes up, and it's actually in the catechism too, is all wanting, desiring, and ambition sinful? So kind of this idea of, okay, so we're not supposed to, like God is telling us not to covet, not to want things that don't belong to us, and to be content with what we have and what he gives us. So does that mean it's, sinful to be like, man, I want like this other situation more than the situation I have now? Like, is it bad to, desire that like promotion and work really hard for that next thing, to have that ambition? So, I know what my answer would be to that, but I'd be interested to see what you guys have to say about that.
I think for me personally, I think that having ambition, having drive is not a negative thing. It can be a really healthy and a good thing, because, work was not a negative thing. So work was created pre-fall. Like Genesis 1 and 2, when you're looking at the whole overarching story of Scripture, everything that was good you saw in the garden. So marriage, relationship, work was a good thing. Like, that drive, this desire for us to bring our best because God's created us. and he's created us, and that's a good thing. To be able to share with the world the gifts that God's given us is a good thing. To have a drive and a motivation behind that is not a bad thing. It's good to have a drive. I think the motivation behind that drive is what becomes important. Because what's really interesting in Scripture is some people say, they misquote Scripture a lot. They say that money is the root of all evil. Jesus doesn't say that money is the root of all evil. He talks about how we desire that money is the root of all evil. Ish, kind of like that. But what you see in Scripture is you see 4 different pictures of wealth. You see the righteous wealthy and the righteous poor. And you see the wicked wealthy and the wicked poor. And so what that begins to show you in Scripture is it's not about how much you do or do not have, but it's about the heart behind what you have. Are you good? Are you righteous with it? Do you realize that everything you have is a gift from God, a blessing that he's given you that you don't own, but you are a steward over? Or do you put your hope and your satisfaction in things you have? You can give somebody the exact same amount of money in a bank account, but how they relate to that is the key issue, and not how much they do or don't have.
Yeah, I think I would respond in a similar way. There's an entire school of thought that talks about human beings at their core, not as rational beings thinking with their minds, but as desiring beings with their heart. That fundamentally what it means to be human is to desire something. And what I would say is it is not sinful to have those desires. I believe that we were hardwired with desires, with longings, with ambitions and yearnings. I think the issue becomes, like you said, Pastor Matt, is where are those desires ultimately oriented? Or like if we're going to get back behind to the heart motivations driving your behavior or your ambitions, where's your heart at is what I would say. Is because really you can pursue something righteous and do it in a fallen way, because that's just who we are. So no matter what I'm trying to say is our desires are flawed and broken. But I think where the real rub comes is in answering the question, what is your heart ultimately desiring?
Right. Yeah.
What is it that is actually fueling your desires? And I think that's where you can get at the heart and say, well, this is a holy desire because I believe it comes from God, and here's why. Conversely, there could be scenarios where your motivations or your ambitions are really being fueled by that promotion, that possession, that status, any number of things. So the core question I would ask is where's your heart, and what is the thing you desire most?
Because, you look at, the example of Jesus in the Gospels. Jesus was filled with passion. He was driven. He was determined. He was focused on a mission. You see so many examples in the Scriptures where nothing is going to pull him off course. He peels away from the crowd because he sensed that they were going to try and make him king. And that wasn't part of his mission, to become king the way they wanted him to become king. He was radically focused. He was passionate about what he was doing. God speaks his passion for us in the Gospels. For God so loved the world, he sent his only son. There's this deep longing and passion you see in the Gospels. That's not a negative thing, but Jesus lives it out in a righteous way, in a way that is for God, with a love for God first, and then a love for neighbor. And so you see that lived out perfectly.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Is that what you would have said too?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think the way that the Catechism says it kind of just wraps all that up. And it says, no, God encourages us to seek his blessings of food, shelter, good jobs, health, success, and so on for ourselves and our family, right? So seeing those things as blessings from God as opposed to this other idol in our life, right? So saying, it's not bad if you're a student and you work really hard to get a good grade on a test, and desire to get a good grade on a test, and have ambition to make the varsity team or the highest band or whatever it is, or get into the best college. It's not bad. But when that thing might not come true necessarily, or it doesn't go the way you want it, do you keep having ambition for that because that's what your life is wrapped around? Or do you see that ultimate goal as a blessing from God, as opposed to this thing that will complete your life?
which really circles it back to the first commandment,
Yep.
which is why I love it, because, you know, what's really the God. And recently I was given a really interesting litmus test, which is if you really want something, if you're driven and passionate for something, like let's just say the promotion. Oftentimes people will say, well, God, if you give me this promotion, then I will. You know, it's a popular thing. Like I'll give 10% of it to the church, or I'm not going to discourage that, but you know, if you want to, but you know, what are you really doing? You're using God as a vehicle to get to your real God, which is the promotion, versus God, if it's your will for me to have this promotion, I'm going to go after it. I'm going to give my best. I'm going to put my best foot forward. I'm going to continue working hard so I can earn that. But if it's your desire for me to have it, great. If it's not, I understand. What's really the God? You know, is the promotion the God, or is God the God? And the promotion is a vehicle to honor God with your gifts. So
I think if I'm thinking about like tangible ways in my life that I can focus on this commandment, I think the easiest thing for us to do is to simply look at our lives and see the things that God has given us that we can be grateful for. You know, like we just talked about, it's not bad to have ambition and to want that next level of success. But I think to truly get down to the root of this commandment is to look at our lives and actually appreciate the things that God's given us now. Look at, I even do this with the confirmation students when I was talking about contentment is, all right, everybody just take a real deep breath and then let it out. And then, hey, like God didn't have to give you that breath that you just took right now. Like there's so many things in our lives that we just take for granted, like every day, that instead of being like, you know, that breath was a gift from God, we're thinking, oh man, why can't I like be able to like be more physically like fast or strong? Like we don't appreciate that. Like, hey, just the fact that I can like walk like right now, like there's some people that can't do that, you know, and like understanding that everything we have is a gift. So a really awesome exercise, and the Catechism actually talks about this, is just every day, like wake up and think of like 5 things that you're grateful for, like in your life, and just thank God for those. And then when you start with that, when you start with the things that God has given you and being content with that, then you can start having this ambition and desire for these other things, and start in the light of those are gifts from God that He might be preparing in advance for me to have those blessings in my life.
Yeah, that's huge. That's actually something that St. Ignatius, founder of the Jesuit order, constantly encouraged his followers to do was, you know, keep in mind the blessings in life. He says, even on the worst day, there are so many blessings that God has poured in that you can focus in on. So I love that you use that as a tool for contentment and peace. But man, it's been a lot of fun to go through these 10 commandments. Hey, we're not going to have an episode next week. We're going to take a week off, but then when we come back, we'll do a wrap up of all the 10 commandments. So if you want to stay in touch with when we have new episodes coming out, subscribe to the Bethlehem Church Live YouTube page. You can download the Bethlehem Church Live mobile app. You can also subscribe to this podcast on any of your favorite podcast platforms. And of course, feel free to rate it. If you enjoy the content, rate it, share a comment below if you have questions. And then of course, you can always share this out with somebody else that's trying to learn to live the way of Jesus tangibly in the world around them. We're looking forward to seeing you next time right here on Fundamentals.